Have you ever experienced something really painful in your past and you've avoided any kind of emotional healing because you don't want to go there? You don't want to relive that painful past again, whether it was just a one-time event or maybe a chapter of your life or maybe your entire childhood. And you think to yourself, if I actually want to heal this, that means I have to go back and have to relive all of that. And even when I just think about that thing, I feel a flood of emotions that are so painful. I just can't go there. In today's video, we're going to talk about why you don't need to relive those painful emotional experiences repeatedly in order to heal. You can actually experience freedom without reliving that trauma or that painful emotional stuff from the past. So let's get into it. So, just as I said before, many people will avoid healing work because they think that it means reopening that history, that those chapters of their life that they don't ever want to re experience or even remember. And just when they start to think about something from their past or talk about something from their past, let's say, for example, someone asks you a question about your past and you just feel a jolt of unwanted emotions because something about that question brought up something from your past as is emotionally painful. And then it leaves you feeling flooded with these unwanted emotions. And that might ruin your entire day, your entire week, maybe even your entire year, especially if it's been, really, really heavy stuff. And so the last thing you want to do is rehash that, right? And for good reason, right? We all want to move towards what feels good and we want to move away from what doesn't feel good. We want to move towards safety and protection. We want to move away from unwanted emotional hurts and pains and maybe even trauma from the past. So, re experiencing pain, though, isn't what actually resolves it. You don't need to relive it in order to resolve that, in order to heal that. Safety in your nervous system is the first thing that actually can create a lasting healing freedom in your mind and your body. We're going to get into more of the ins and outs of what that looks like in more of these videos. But I'm here to tell you, I've worked with thousands of people over the years, children, adults, seniors, people of all ages. And I've seen radical transformation happen in the minds and the bodies of people who have done the work. They've been to, years of therapy and on tons of different medications and et cetera, right? They've tried all the things and they never got that emotional freedom because the methodology was wrong, right? And they didn't have to re-experience repeatedly and telling their story over and over again in order to experience lasting freedom. Really, really cool stuff. So healing is not the same as re-experiencing. And I think that that's a common misunderstanding that if I want to heal something, then I need to go back and re-experience this thing and tell my story over and over again. And then I'm going to experience all that pain, right? And then what do I do with that? Because I've tried that before, and then I just feel even worse than I did before. That's a very defeating type of feeling. You don't have to retell your story over and over again in order to resolve that emotional charge, in order to experience emotional healing and breakthrough, in order to experience peace in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit. You can actually experience freedom in a gentle, nurturing way. And gentle doesn't mean shallow, and it doesn't mean inefficient. And I know that oftentimes when we hear the word gentle, especially in today's hustle culture, where everything is go hard, go hard, go hard, do more, do more, do more, right? When you hear the word gentle, it seems like, well, that's not going to be effective. That's not going to be efficient. That's not going to go deep, right? It's counterculture when we're talking about hustle culture. But I'm also here to tell you that I've helped people heal deeply from things that have happened and have been carried on their shoulders and in their heart and in their minds and even in their bodies for decades in a gentle, nurturing way. And it's was far more effective than anything that they've tried. So there is definitely hope for healing for you and for your clients. If you're a practitioner, a licensed practitioner, a non-licensed practitioner, anyone who holds space for other people to heal, you help them overcome, any kind of difficult challenges, even if it's not necessarily deep trauma. Maybe it's just something like, not just, but maybe it's, maybe you're a business coach or something like that, where you're helping people overcome different obstacles and, creating a mindset of success. There are things that are going to surface that are going to be roadblocks and potential self-sabotage that are going to get in the way of their goals. And so this is really helpful for any kind of practitioner who holds any kind of space for people, whether it's emotional healing or even personal development. The same is true. We get in our own way based upon experiences that we've had from the past that have an emotional charge attached to that hasn't been alleviated, that hasn't been healed. So safe processing allows the nervous system to update. It allows the emotions and the subconscious to get on the same page as your conscious thinking brain. And this is where you see people hitting goals that they've never been able to hit before because they're no longer feeling stuck. When safety leads, healing actually accelerates. And I know a lot of what I talk about, in at least what I've talked about so far in these videos, has really been highlighting emotional healing, but physical healing often follows. This is a huge missing link for the most part, especially in the medical community, that when we have these unresolved emotions or things from your past, they interfere with your body's ability to come back to balance. And so I've seen a lot of GI issues and headaches and tension and even chronic issues like fibromyalgia and chronic pain. I've seen those things dissipate, be alleviated as a result of highlighting and emphasizing emotional healing. When we can get the issues out of the tissues, the physiological emotions neutralized in the body in a safe, gentle, nurturing way, the body begins to become more balanced. And symptoms, oftentimes, what I've seen, I can tell you story after story after story, and I have a whole series coming down the pipeline on psychosomatic healing, basically the mind body connection and very specific things that you might experience in your body as a result of unhealed emotions and how you can experience healing of very specific symptoms as a result of healing specific emotions. It's profound. It is amazing. Anyway, all that to say, when safety leads, healing accelerates. Healing in both your mind and your body. And you're not required to suffer needlessly and repeatedly over and over and over again in order to heal those things from your past. You don't have to keep retelling your story until you're blue in the face and keep reliving the emotional pain in order to heal that. Healing can be gentle, it can be contained, and it can be very effective. So, resolution actually happens through creating a physiological change in your body, neutralizing those emotions. One of the illustrations that I've used in a previous video is imagine that you're in a pool and you have a bunch of balloons of all different shapes and sizes, mostly different sizes, and those balloons have different pressure, right? So a tiny little balloon is maybe not a lot of pressure. A big balloon has a lot of pressure. And those are illustrative of unresolved emotions from your past. That pressure, trying to submerge those balloons underwater and not letting any of them pop up above the surface, that requires so much energy. Can you imagine trying to do that? Some of the balloons are just going to pop up eventually, right? Those are illustrative of getting triggered. Now, if there is no pressure in those balloons, then you won't get triggered. They're not going to pop up above the surface and just fly up above the surface because there's no pressure to begin with. This is what I'm talking about when I'm mentioning here the physiological change in your body. Your emotions are physiological. They reside in your body. When you can neutralize them, in other words, like deflating the balloon, getting the pressure out of the system, depressurizing the emotions, changing that physiology of the emotions, that's when you get lasting change. And that's when you no longer get triggered by the things that used to set you off. It is so freeing. So here's an everyday example. In effective emotional healing, the body may briefly revisit an experience from your past, maybe a memory, you think of a memory and you briefly stay there, but not to relive it and tell your story over and over and over again in all the nitty-gritty details of everything. Think of it like gently approaching a hot stove with your hand, just long enough to confirm it's hot. You don't have to put your hand on the burner. You're just approaching it and you're like, oh, I feel the heat, right? You back away. You're like, I know that that stove is hot. But you don't keep your hand there to burn, right? So, in effective emotional healing, we're going to, generally speaking, bring up some kind of memory, at least enough for you to engage the physiology of those emotions. But we don't just hang out there and retell the story for hours and just keep those elevated, pressurized emotions just pressurized and give it nowhere to go. We need to let the steam out, right? It's like a pressure cooker. Imagine if you've ever cooked with a pressure cooker before. One of my favorite ways, well, one of the ways that I cook some meals is with an instant pot, which is also a pressure cooker, right? Imagine, you have something in the pressure cooker. The pressure cooker builds up a bunch of steam and pressure, and you can't open the lid because it's so pressurized, right? So you have to hit the release valve and get out of the way because that steam is going to fly out and it will burn you if you're close to it, right? But when all that steam comes out, it depressurizes. There's no more pressure left in there when you hit that quick release button and it just comes flying out, right? That's kind of like what happens in your body when you've got these unresolved emotions. It has just created so much pressure. And when we retell the story over and over again, we're not doing anything to let the pressure out. It's almost as if it can actually build more pressure. It doesn't do you any justice by doing that. What will help is finding a way to actually let the pressure out. That's exactly what the feel better fast technique does, is it helps to literally get the issues out of the tissues, create a change in the physiology, depressurize your system so you can actually feel peace and more spaciousness and freedom. So it changes the physiology. So your body no longer reacts to the same stimulus, the same thing that used to trigger you in the past. There's no longer anything there to get triggered. That's a really, really powerful thing. So just to recap, healing doesn't require repeatedly re experiencing or retelling your story from the emotional pain of your past over and over and over again. It requires safety and completion by addressing the physiology of emotion, the issues that are in your tissues. The body keeps the score, right? Have you heard of that book before? It's a number one selling book on healing, especially trauma, but it basically gets into the science of how these things that cause emotional pain are stored in the body. So if we can address the physiology of those emotions and get them out of the system, that's when you experience true lasting freedom and healing. So the body can resolve patterns without retelling the story over and over and over again. It just needs the right tools to do it. So, coming up next, I'm going to be discussing what keeps emotional patterns and unwanted behaviors looping. Why does that happen? Why do emotional patterns and unwanted behaviors keep looping? Why do they keep coming back full circle, even when you know better? We're going to talk about that next. If you have any questions or comments about anything that we covered in this video, please leave your comments or questions below, and I'm happy to answer them if I can. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.